Right, let's move on, shall we, to a man who, as far as we know, hasn't had any books published, but he is in charge of Exeter City. It is Matt Taylor, and Exeter finishing ninth this season, missing out on the playoff places on the final day of the season. Huge disappointment for the Devon side and everyone involved as well, after it looked like they were going to make it. But, Mike, you don't think that is such a bad result, all things considered, do you?
No, I was expecting Exeter to finish in the top six this season, kind of going off the past two seasons and going off Matt Taylor's reputation. You know, he's a manager that this was his third season, but it's easy to forget that this is his first job because he feels like the absolute seasoned campaigner in League Two now that, you know, has been around the circuit with three really solid seasons as well. This being the weakest of them, finishing outside the top seven. You know, and yeah, I just think I was fully expecting him to be top seven this season on that basis. But then you look between the lines at everything that's gone on this term and what, you know, everybody's had to deal with issues around COVID and stuff. But you think about Exeter they've promoted 5 or 6 academy players this season. They completely changed the entire back four from the playoff final. The fact that they were in the playoff final last season meant they had such a short turnaround compared to other teams, less preparation time. The fact that it's such a congested season, geography matters more. All the travelling they've had to do. You know, I was looking back at a congested period they had around February, March time. They played 7 away games. You know, for most other clubs, like all 7 of those journeys would have been one of the longest journeys in the season. You know, and they were playing some of those games with 10 men, went down to 9 men at Newport. You know, turnarounds every 3 days. You're playing an entire second half with 9 men away at Newport, defending a 1-0 lead until stoppage time. Must be absolutely exhausted. And this is, you know, there's no respite. So there's been no let-up at any stage. So that Newport game has an effect 3, 4, 5, 6 games down the line. And you read between the lines and you look at all the travelling they did in February and March. You look at all the times that they went behind in games and had to chase games, went down to 10 men, went down to 9 men. And you just think, actually, it's extraordinary that they finished 9th in the table because there's teams and managers that have had to cope. But I think it speaks a lot for the foundations that Taylor already has in place that they've still achieved a top half finish. And they'll be much better for it next season now, having blooded some of their own exciting youngsters, but not just blooded them. I mean, you know, they've absolutely been thrown in at the deep end, you know, into such an arduous season, and they should be so much better equipped for men's football next season.
Yeah, and injuries haven't helped as Wando Williams, one of those who's been missing for a chunk of the second half of the season. And next season, you imagine as well, with hopefully a more sensible fixture list, that Exeter will be able to bounce back. But one thing you always get from Matt Taylor, I feel, is a very measured reaction, a very measured approach. And, you know, his reaction to Exeter missing out on the playoffs, obviously, personally, he's very disappointed, and he's disappointed for the group as well. But his response was, you know, kind of what the fans wanted to hear, really, you know, positive, looking ahead already to next year.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of enabled me to take a more level perspective as well, because I think Taylor's not a manager that's shy to criticise if something's not good enough. I think he gets straight to the point of anything. And I think he was absolutely brutal towards the players that let them down in the playoff final last season. You know, those defenders were just completely carted out of the club, and he talked about a weak mentality of, you know, the demons of previous seasons and lost playoff finals all came out in that context at Wembley again, and how it just wasn't good enough. You know, we just need people who were stronger than that, who with a bit more character and personality. And he was just ruthless. He got rid of them. We'll play the kids. We'll play the kids because we'll give them a chance. If I can't rely on some of these seasoned pros who go missing at crucial moments, then let's blood the kids, because, if you know, it was evident in the what is now the Papa John's Trophy, the EFL Trophy last season, that you know, Exeter got to, was it the semi-finals, playing all of these kids, and so it's evident that they had this talent coming through, and you know, so he's managed, you know, to blood them this season and bring them through. But he is very he's strong. He gets to the point of what he wants of anything. So when he turns around and says at the end of this season that he's perfectly, you know, he's happy to finish 9th and he's looking forward to next season and looking at the positives, we must remember this is a manager that got to the playoff final last season and mullered his players in the post-match interview afterwards.
One thing as well that, Exeter fans have had to get used to is after such a long time under Paul Tisdale, who, of course, if you do want to hear more about, go back and listen to our episode on him. That was just before actually he was sacked at Bristol Rovers. But Matt Taylor, who worked under Tisdale, talks about, learning a lot from him, but he's very quick to reiterate and inform and let people know that he's completely different in his managerial style from Paul Tisdale. And, that is what the club needed, really, wasn't it? It sounded like it to the untrained ear that they just simply bought in someone who worked under him, so it was going to be same again. But actually, very, very different people.
Yeah, he's a very different personality type. And yet he was a Tisdale stalwart as a player, before the change happened. But yeah, he's coming in and basically, I think because he was behind the scenes beforehand, he already knew in advance, okay, things had gone a bit stale, I believe, and he knew in advance the way he wanted to do things and how it was going to be radically different from what Tisdale left behind, and was also aware of what, possibly what the fans wanted to see and hadn't, were calling for beforehand. So yeah, he is very, very different. And whereas Tisdale was more of a process manager and was more of, it was all about, developing players who thought for themselves and stuff like that. With Taylor, it's all about outcomes. It's all about, with Tisdale, it used to be about passing lines. It used to be about how you play, how you cut through teams in the midfield and stuff like that, and always trying to play this nice football. He kind of prided himself on how good Exeter looked on the eye and how well respected they were for that. Taylor came in kind of the opposite. It's about what happens in both penalty boxes. It's interesting when you listen to him in a post-match interview, because he kind of just brushes over everything that happens in the middle third of the pitch. If a question's directed about pressure building, all he's interested in is penalty boxes. It's about key moments in games. It's about pinning the other team back into their penalty box, making things happen in the final third, making sure delivery's good, and making sure that, Exeter can play awful for 89 minutes, but all Taylor's interested in is that one key moment when the ball dropped on the penalty spot and somebody had a yard of space. Why didn't you hit the target? And it's the only thing you can think about after the game. And, it's almost like most of the other stuff didn't happen. Now, this bleeds into the player's mindset over time. You kind of relaxed about the general state of a game, but when key moments happen in a game and when a ball drops at the right moment, at the right time, in the right place, to seize that opportunity, because that's the moment that Taylor's going to seize upon afterwards and make a big deal about and want to talk about. And, this is what has got him results. It's this, Exeter have always done very, very well relative to their XG performance for the most part, because they don't need to absolutely dominate games in XG terms, because they are a team that they're a very masculine team that take the big moments when they come along.
Just going back to the comparison with Tisdale, they're both clearly very intelligent. Matt Taylor had a slightly unconventional route, studying at college as well when he started to, started to train with the university and then moved on from there. So both Tisdale and Taylor are very intelligent, but I feel as though they put their levels of intelligence across in very different ways. Tisdale often used quite flowery language. You always felt he was almost showing off slightly. This high level of intelligence. I'm different from other managers. Whereas Matt Taylor, you feel kind of uses that to, he doesn't show off about it, but he funnels it into the way he manages and how he deals with the players and how he deals with the press and how he keeps everything in check. To me, it feels like a very different level of intelligence.
Yeah, it's logic in different ways, whereas Tisdale uses internal logic and it's about intelligence and quality of information. With Taylor, it's about action. It's about doing things at the right moment in the right places at the right times. It's about resources and managing resources. It's about outer world organisation. It's about the work you do on the training ground and putting it onto the pitch. And like I say, it's outcome focused. It's, the drills they will do. He's a big set piece manager and things like that. And it's the drills you do on the training ground are kind of pointless if they're not being put out onto the pitch on a Saturday. There's no point wasting time on, I don't know, on principles, I guess, on process things, if there's only a marginal chance that will actually be, required on a Saturday in a game. He wants outcomes. He wants to have an immediate effect on what's, you listen to him sometimes. I think back to earlier in the season, he talked about a player being on the toilet, like at half time, straight after the game. And he was straight on. He's like, we need to find out what he ate before the game because he can't eat that again. And it's like, literally, right, something's happened, something's gone right or gone wrong. Okay, let's find the closest possible cause and effect relationship. Right, let's make sure we fix that. Fix the next thing, fix the next thing, fix the next thing. He's trying to fix so many different things between game to game that, it kind of, I suppose it leaves the players with no excuses in the sense that he's given this impression and this sense that that's another problem solved. That's another problem solved. We're just solving problems. You're getting fewer and fewer excuses now because I get through so much work in getting to the bottom of what went wrong with one performance to the next. Let's get it right for the next time. So, if you're on the toilet with diarrhea, we've got to find out what it was that caused that. You never eat that again as your pre-match meal. Even if it's coincidence, well, we're not taking that chance. This is, and it's always to the point. It's always about outcomes. And it's interesting that he said, he is a manager that very much talks about the league tables. You get what you deserve. He never blames referees. He will criticize referees' decisions if he thinks a referee's decision's wrong, but he'll never blame referees for a result. Ultimately, you get what you deserve in a game, whatever adversity is thrown at you. If you do your jobs in your penalty box and you take your chances in the opposition penalty box, you get the result. You don't have to play well, but you will get the result and you get what you deserve. And it's just a whole culture that filters through to the players.
Does that outcome focus then, and particularly the example that you mentioned involving the toilet, does that then detract sometimes from being able to empathize and being able to, I guess, soften the blow for the players because he's already thinking about how to fix it? There's no, oh, how are you feeling? It's right. How can we stop that happening? Do you think that does not, the balance is slightly off there?
Yeah, it's the same again. In fact, it's interesting we're saying this at the same episode of Steve Bruce because it is the same. It's the same polarity flipped. This is the logic of the strong point, and the player's individual emotions or internal emotions is a blind spot. Don't expect much sympathy from Matt Taylor if you don't do your job in the 89th minute because you're not going to get any at all. You get, he's just about fixing problems. It's not about how people feel about things. It's, if we fix this problem, the same problem won't occur next week. That's just the way. But I think, it can be done in such a way that you don't, he can be brutal like he was after the playoff final last season. But I don't think people, as a rule, look at Matt Taylor or players that play under him. He's shown a lot of compassion for the young players that have been playing for Exeter this season. And there's a lot of understanding that, these players are just starting out in their career, so we've got to cut them a bit of slack. So it's not to say that doesn't exist, but don't expect him to compromise his principles in order for your feelings. There is, to a degree, there is empathy there because young players need to be given a bit more slack. So it does exist, but it is a blind spot in the sense that it's not switched on all the time, worrying about how people feel about things. We're in the results business. It's all about getting results.
So I think I know the answer to this based on what you already said, but next season, you're feeling pretty positive for Matt Taylor and Exeter. Do you think with a fairly routine campaign and perhaps, those younger players with another year under their belt, that, there will be better results ahead?
Yes, I do think there's certain teams this season who, you read between the lines, you look at the bottom, you look at the table at the end of the season and you just think, okay, they've had a lot to contend with, more than most teams, Exeter. And at the beginning of the season, I'd have said they should be looking for top three now because they finished just on the cusp of the playoffs, then in the playoffs, but lost the playoff final. And then, you're thinking, right, kick on top three. But then you think of the turnover of players, you think about the promoting the academy players, you think about what actually a COVID congested season meant for them compared to other teams. And then you're thinking, hang on, ninth isn't actually that bad. So top 7 next season, I think, is a fair call for what Exeter fans should be expecting. But exciting times as well because of, the promoting from within their own development squad and all clubs, all supporters like to see a batch of your own players coming through and then representing you in that way. And I think some of those players will potentially go on to have good careers for not being pampered too much. Because I think Taylor's not, he's cut them slack. He's not been too brutal with them. But at the same time, I think they might have learned some valuable lessons in the fact that football is a results business and your feelings sometimes have to take a back seat.
In terms of the miles clocked up next season, it swings and roundabouts, really. They've lost Cheltenham, but they do gain Bristol Rovers, and they also get Swindon as well, not too far. And they'll probably be desperately hoping that Torquay come up, I imagine, from the National League.
Yeah, well, it's always going to be a big thing. And I guess, geography is always a big thing, but it's been a bigger thing this season more than most. I think also as well, talking or looking ahead towards next season, you can say about recruitment that once you could say one or two windows further down the line in a recruitment process, it's about holding on to some of the senior pros now, like Randell Williams, I think, or, and trying to attract players to Devon's not easy. You got a smaller pool of players that you can attract. Recruitment might be easier as well this turnaround. So that's another factor where geography is concerned with Exeter too.